Thank you for joining me. I'm pumped to do this. If you guys have been paying attention to me in any regard, I've been working on this velocity-based training project for a while. Um, I was actually, I'm going to pull up my remote real quick so I can switch slides and stuff. All right. So I've been working on this velocity-based training project for a while, right? Collecting information and stuff, but then probably really started writing and deciding I was to write a book and spend some time on it. Um, at January 1st of this year. And then ended up at January 1st time we had the pandemic and we're locked at home. So I just started writing, right? And so I actually got the book all done. We got a ton of words out there. I did a ton of extra research, did my own research with my athletes and all that kind of stuff. And then sent that off to the publisher, and that should be coming um, back to me in the next couple weeks. And so I should be able to like get the book itself out there. But I just had all this information in my head. I had so much fun writing it that, and I don't know if my writing is as good, or maybe my speaking's not as good as my writing, but who knows? I just wanted to get it out here. So I really appreciate you guys being here. So I'm going to share everything I got on velocity-based training, minus anything that I've added in really lately. But so we're going to do velocity-based training for weightlifting. We're just going to go through the whole thing. So, we're going to talk about the types of units. We're going to talk about how we measure it, what's important. I'm going to show you guys like a whole training program that I've been doing with athletes. It's been really, really effective for improving their lifts, and something I think is very fun and been really, really useful. So let's get going to this first slide. All right, so that's my family. I always say thank you. The very first slide, anytime I present, is always a thank you to my family, because right now, my wife is putting my two oldest sons, Franklin and Jack. You can see Jack's over here, Franklin over here, right? They just got a big bed, and well, Jack has had a big bed, but they're sharing a room, and Franklin's going nuts. So she's up there at 9:30 at night, or 9 o'clock at night, tending to them. So thanks to her. Thanks to you guys for coming late in the evening. And it's not lost on me that you guys have families, you have businesses, you have professions. There's probably something you'd like rather be doing than being here listening to me, right? So I am very, very appreciative of you guys spending the time to listen to me talk about stuff that we're mutually interested in, and it is not lost on me that you guys are doing that. So I really, really appreciate it. All right. Okay, so a little bit more about me. We should be able to get past that really quick. I was I was an athlete. Went to Indiana University, did the hammer throw. Knew I wanted to be a coach for a long time. I coached track all through college. Wrote strength training programs for all my track athletes, and coached kids to state championships and stuff while I was still a collegiate athlete. So I knew I wanted to coach, but I thought I was going to be track and field. But after I got done, I was the youngest Division I track and field coach in 2006, 2007. I was an assistant track and field coach at Indiana University for their throws. So I got a trial by fire at a Big Ten university. We did okay. I was not ready for the job. And, as they do in track and field, they bring in a whole new staff when a new head coach comes in. So a new head coach came in and I was let go. So right after that, I did the Olympic trials in 2008 in the hammer throw. And then that was kind of the end of my hammer throw career. And I started Force Fitness and Performance, which is here in Bloomington, Indiana. In about 12 years, we had over 125 in Division I athletes. That's like 12 per year in a town of 40,000 people. We had, in Indiana, we had a Miss Basketball. We had, dozens of Indiana basketball or, all Indiana All-Stars, which is a big deal in Indiana. We had Division I All-Americans. We had, so all these kids and all sorts of sports. And I loved it. It was a lot of fun. We had this huge facility, and we're just like totally rocking and rolling. But my issue, right, with all of that was that I have a hard time when I'm like not in control of every single result. And so as a strength coach, I've always struggled with this idea that I might get my soccer player faster and stronger, but he or she may still suck with the ball at their feet, or they may not tactically be very good or whatever. So I wasn't ultimately in charge of the outcomes. I can remember, a time where, had a basketball player who I, got stronger, faster, jumped higher, ran faster, everything, but, they still couldn't shoot. So their coach was like disappointed that they had, worked with somebody in the off season instead of shooting. So I want to control the winning aspect. So in 2018, I sold Force Fitness and Performance, and was able to start 1 Kilo, which is just a weightlifting company. We do just weightlifting. I coach only weightlifters. I coach people online. I coach them in person. We have a big team. I coach the strongest woman in America, and I coach international team kids. I coach old people, and I have lifters over 60 years old. I have lifters that are 10 years old, and I love coaching each and every one of them. It's pretty sweet for me to be able to coach weightlifters full time. So that started in 2018, and we set 2018, 2019. We've only had one meet in 2020. We set some of my masters lifters set 16 national records. So we have a really good masters team, and I am also a weightlifter. I lift as a masters athlete. All right. So next one, what is velocity training, right? So from the very beginning of my training, right, I've always wanted to figure out what is the right stress for that athlete. Not, I think it's really easy to train people too hard, do too much to them. And what is the right stress? So the percentages, right? X number of sets of this at this percent, that always left me lacking, because I think we have all experienced how hard that can be, right? That we may have athletes come in and it's too heavy or it's too light and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of abandoned percentages a number of years ago, because I also didn't have 1 rep maxes on everybody. So we started doing rep maxes each day, our training maxes, started doing RPE, reps in reserve, all that kind of stuff, just to try and find that optimized stress. And then we have to think about the athletes that we coach. I don't coach I coach normal college kids and high school kids and adults with jobs. I have one full-time weightlifter, and she should be, because she's the strongest woman in America, right? But other than that, everybody else has a full-time job, and she's in a unique situation anyways. Everybody has so much extra stress, and all that stress is stress, right? So what we think might come into play is not going to be there, right? So if we go 80% one day, we know that might not feel like 80%. We say RPE what? RPEs can vary from athlete to athlete, because some athletes are programmed to go really hard after that RPE, and they'll lie to you. They'll be like, that was a 7, but they just missed the final rep, right? We know that's a 10. Rep maxes, and I have kids who would spend an hour trying to get an extra kilo, right, if you didn't watch too carefully. And I have other kids who would leave 10 to 15 in the tank. So I think velocity will optimize stress. And I'll tell you my story about when I first saw velocity-based training. So I was a thrower, and we were at the Big Ten championships, and we hosted it one year, and the Iowa Hawkeyes came in, and they were my team, Indiana. We had either one of the top 2 seeds in the indoor championships in the shot and the hammer, and the weight. And Iowa was the other person. They either had the top seed or the second seed. So if we weren't first, they were first. And so I was very interested in what they were doing. And they walked in, and this was 2004, 5, probably 5. And they had a tendo. And I'm trying to just peek around. I want to see what Iowa does in the weight room before the meet. And I just kind of hang, and they hook up the tendo, and they're lifting, and their strength coach, guy named Damon Davis, who is now at Auburn, was just saying, oh man, so-and-so just hit a velocity PR at such and such. He's ready, right? That's the fastest he's ever moved that. He's ready. I think he's going to PR this weekend. And sure enough, all of Iowa's dudes came out and PR'd and beat us, right? And, we didn't beat them. So, we didn't PR or anything like that. So I was like, what is that? What is a contraption? So that idea of velocity-based training, attaching a tendo or some sort of thing to it, was always intriguing to me from that point on. All right, so what is VBT, right? Velocity-based training. Brian Mann is the one who actually coined that phrase in his really awesome book, which is serving as part of my desk right now, but it's right here. and that's developing explosive athletes. So the use of velocity-based training and training athletes. And that's incredible. I got this third edition is really, really good. And it's now finally in hard or like a physical print instead of just an ebook. And I love that. But man, did that, I don't know when the first edition was at, the mid 2000s, maybe 2010 or earlier. But R.A. Roman, who was a Soviet weightlifting coach back in, I happen to have these here. R.A. Roman in The Training of a Weightlifter. That one is from 1986. And if you look in that book, R.A. Roman has all of the velocities listed out. And I'll show you some of those. He has velocities for different heights in terms of how to make a snatch and clean and jerk and all that kind of stuff. So Roman has a ton of stuff in that Training of the Weightlifter that I think is really good. And then Louis Simmons, I think in 2001 or 2 in Powerlifting USA magazine, Louis Simmons had an article about using the Tendo Fitrodyne for their dynamic effort day. So this stuff's been going on a long time. And the reason it's become really popular now is we can get access to this technology much cheaper than what we used to be, right? So, but we also want to think, I want you guys to think about this as we frame this whole thing today. It's just a parameter of training, right? It's not a magic pill. It's a parameter of training like load, like sets, reps, rest time, whatever. You would program, I want you to get to this idea of programming velocity just as you would the other pieces, okay? And so that's how I am using it to a really good effect. What VBT is not, it's not a panacea. It's not for beginners, right? If I'm just like putting somebody in there, I'm not going to hook them up to a Tendo or a Rep 1 or whatever, you know. I'm not going to do that for beginners, and it's not going to fix bad technique. This is something that I would use with like more advanced athletes. It's not going to fix bad stuff. It's not going to make a bad program a good program. It's going to make regular training be a little smarter. It's going to have a better variable in regular training. It's not going to like revolutionize everything you do. It's going to really give you a better piece of information that you can look at. And you know, I want to bring up one thing. Tim Saha is the strength coach at University of Washington for football. He was with Chris Peterson for a long time, the football coach, and he said that they have a level, right? You don't get to use velocity-based training until you're a junior or something, and you have to have certain strength levels. So it's not for beginners. It's just like at a certain point we need to start moving faster, and so that's, you know, it is a really useful tool when applied to the right people in the right way. All right, so why velocity-based training? 4 reasons it's good for your program. All right, velocity doesn't lie. I like to say it this way. Percentage-based programs can lie, and everybody who's ever lifted weights knows this. If 80% or 90% is programmed, one day it may feel like 90%, one day it may feel like more than 90%, and one day it may feel like way less than 90%. And Jovanovic and Flanagan in one of their papers in 2014 said they showed that there's an 18% difference on how an athlete might perceive a weight. So 90% may feel like 108%, or it might feel like 72%. And if you wanted a 90% lift, there's a very specific reason we are saying 90%. If you get 108%, that was not your intention. If you get 72%, that was not your intention. So percentage-based programs can lie to you, right? RPE depends on the athlete's knowledge, experience, truthfulness, right? I've always noticed that. I have some athletes, and it's not their fault, right? It's just how they're wired. Some athletes will be like, definitely a 7, but it's totally a 10 if I watch it, right? Some athletes will be like, that was a 10, and you're like, I think that was a 7, right? And so RPE is, and their experience, you know, more experienced athletes are going to be able to estimate their RPE better than an inexperienced athlete. So rep max totally depends on personality, right? So velocity marks stay constant no matter an athlete's current state. And okay. All right, one more thing on that. Velocity stays constant no matter an athlete's current state. So that 80% lift has an 80% speed, right? So if you say you want it around 80%, you look back on your velocity profile, and 80% will have a speed that you can kind of program, right? If you want that number that looks like 80%. All right, VBT is autoregulation. So it's perfect that, you know, autoregulation is a huge, huge topic, right? We talk about all these different ways people wearing whoops and they're this and this, and are you ready for training? And we'll get more into that, but it is autoregulation. It's a perfect method for autoregulation because it is a truthful method. It responds to daily fluctuations of an athlete. And velocity-based training led to significantly increased jump height and bench press over percentage-based training. That's a recent study by Durrell. And basically just saying like a percentage-based program, because we have such different fluctuations, the idea of auto-regulating your program is applying the perfect stimulus on that day, right? And if we apply the correct stimulus on the day, we're going to get the better result. So it is a great, great method of auto-regulation. And so just my personal story is I've used VBT on nearly every lift I've taken for 2.5 to 3 years, right? And I just thought as a master, like I'm a master's weightlifter, and as a master's weightlifter, I decided that I wanted to like make sure I was doing the right amount on a given day. So I just looked at like what minimums would be and would train like above a minimum and make sure that I was feeling good for the day. And if I dip below a minimum, day over, right? And so I've been doing that for 2.5 years on my snatches and clean and jerks. And I've hit lifetime PRs all the way up to age 38 and won the Masters World Championships last year, right? At age, I don't know, I was 37 last year, but I won the Masters World Championships last year. And because I was feeling really good, and I train really minimally. If like you looked at my specific program, I do like one heavy or a couple heavy sets of snatch, a couple heavy sets of clean and jerk, one thing a day, and then some like bodybuilding and core work every day. So it's snatch, clean and jerk, squat, snatch, clean and jerk, squat. That's how I train every week. Very little, but I want to apply the correct stimulus. And VBT is function as a perfect mode of auto-regulation for my own personal program. All right, so velocity is a cue to your athletes. We know this from Wolf, right? In 2013, that external cues outperform internal cues. So cues about results are better than an internal cue, tighten your lats, whatever. Velocity is the ultimate results-based external cue. Move the bar this fast is the best external cue, right? And intentionally moving the bar as fast as possible results in greater improvement. That's the Gonzalez-Badillo lab. And just by the way, you're going to see Gonzalez-Badillo on a lot of these. That lab is doing some really cool stuff. So you could, if you just put that in ResearchGate or Google Scholar or whatever, that name Gonzalez-Badillo, you will find tons of stuff on velocity-based training that's really helpful. And then being given feedback on each rep about the velocity helps athletes improve even faster, right? So just telling the athlete move the bar as fast as possible results in greater improvement. Giving them the specific target of the velocity on each rep helps athletes improve even faster. So this is a cool experiment. During quarantine, I used a unit in my house, right? I had a rep 1 unit and I would use it for every set. And I would have a target. I'd go look at it. Okay, hit the target, or I did not. Another 2 of my lifters were training in the same garage, right? They're neighbors and they're training in the same garage. And they trained with one another with a rep 1. And they got way better improvements than I did. Now, they've been lifting less than me. They should get better improvements, but they got like 15, 20 kilos on their total in 3 months, right? Because I would give them targets and the other person would shout the result after every single rep. So just giving the feedback after every single rep leads to faster improvements than after the set or after the workout. So that was really cool. That's the Nagata in 2018. And then in terms of like results-based cues, you're going to recruit like higher threshold motor units when you tell athletes to go faster, and you're going to recruit stuff that athletes don't normally recruit. And just anecdotally, the first time you train at a speed, the athletes will say, my traps are way sore, or my glutes are way sore, because they are really recruiting everything they have to make the bar achieve the speed you want. Okay, higher velocity is a good thing, right? So we definitely know as coaches that athletes need tempos, right? That there's a time and place. We don't necessarily always say go as fast as possible because we might want greater time under tension because we're developing a hypertrophy block. But not all reps all the time during all types of training blocks will be performed as fast as possible. But there was an interesting study that goes along with velocity to show us exactly the kind of velocity we want. And this is Blanco, and it was basically that that if you let an athlete drop 0%, 10%, 20%, or 40% on a set, the athletes who dropped in velocity, right? So if you started a velocity of, 1 meter a second and you drop 20%, that's 0.8 on the final rep, or 40%, 0.6 on the final rep. If you cut them off at those 20% or 40%, those athletes get much greater hypertrophy gains than an athlete who stops at 0 or 10% velocity drop. But the athlete who drops 40% ends up with a much slower rate of force development. So they actually get like big and slow. They get hypertrophy gains, but they lose their rate of force development. The 20% seem like a really good tempo drop that allows the athlete to get the hypertrophy gains when we think about time under tension, all that kind of stuff. But it also allows the athlete to maintain that explosiveness and speed that we're after. So that was a really cool one. But we go back to that Gonzalez video, training the fastest speed possible on each rep made athletes significantly stronger. So when they compared and said go as fast as possible, those athletes got stronger than the ones who tried any different tempo or anything like that. And so the argument sometimes is I don't need a unit to make my athletes go as fast as possible. I'll tell them to go fast as possible. So there's a Hirsch one that says target speeds are more effective than the broad cue of go fast. So that's like, if you give an athlete the cue 1.0 meters per second, they're going to ultimately go faster than an athlete where you just say go as fast as possible. So the real number, having a real number, is more effective than just go fast. So I thought that was interesting as well. Let me see if I have any other notes on that one. Oh, and the last thing on this one is on a unit, right? You're going to need a unit for this to be really into it. I'm going to show you a slide where if you don't have a unit, you'll be able to kind of guesstimate on the Olympic lifts and all that kind of stuff about what's happening. But we're talking the difference between like 2.2 meters a second and 2.0 meters a second when it's a snatch, right? So having a tool and method to measure this is beneficial than just using your eye, because I have looked at a lot of lifts and gone, that one was really fast, or felt a lift and go, that one's really fast. Gone over, looked at the unit, and boom, it wasn't that fast, right? It wasn't as fast as the previous rep in the set, So it is very, the real information is much more important for you. All right, so what are you measuring? Are we measuring mean velocity, peak velocity? Mean is the average velocity of the entire concentric portion of the movement. Peak is the highest velocity achieved during the concentric portion of the movement. And we'll measure different things for different movements. So mean velocity for slow lift. So on a slow lift, like a squat, I'm not going to talk about bench or deadlift or anything like that. They're similar. But in terms of, I measure our squats. The squats there's a similar arc of acceleration and deceleration, no matter the lift or the height, right? So back squat, front squat, similar arc of acceleration and deceleration. And the athlete also is slowing the bar down at the top, right? So if they tried to accelerate all the way, the bar would pop off their neck and then crash back down. So we don't want that. We want, just a normal squat. We're going to find that similar arc of acceleration and deceleration. They're going to have a pretty similar signature. There are differences when we talk about height to some degree, but it's not as big as the differences you would see in a snatch and clean and jerk, right? So we'll talk about why height is important, but that's coming up. All right, peak velocity for fast lifts. Weightlifting movements, Olympic lifts require peak velocity. That's the highest velocity achieved across the entire concentric. The movements are ballistic. So if you think about an Olympic lift, if you just let go, it's going to keep going. You're launching the bar into the air, right? And you are not slowing it down. Gravity is slowing it down. So it's flying up in the air. As you turn over, that's gravity, because you're trying to stop it before it goes back down. So a ballistic movement is going to be slowed down by gravity. So we don't want to catch that part, right? We don't want to catch the turnover. A mean velocity on an Olympic lift, a lot of times you might be coached to pull slow off the floor so you maintain good position. So that's going to slow the lift down. And so the mean velocity is not going to be indicative of whether or not you make the lift or not. It is good information to have, but it's not indicative of whether you make it or not. Peak velocity is going to be indicative of whether you make it or not. All right, so what do the different speeds mean? I like, when I was introduced to strength and conditioning, this is 1997, right? 1996, it was like train fast, be fast. And I'm sure that still holds up. I like that idea, train fast, be fast. but that was it, right? And all I heard was power, power, power. And I've like hung my hat on the idea that if I can make athletes more powerful, they're going to be very good at their sport. Not necessarily just out and out strong. Not, I'm not a speed guy, but I'm like a power guy, right? So they're going to be explosive. They're going to run fast tens. They're going to jump high, all that kind of stuff. And then as I got more into coaching, I heard this power term. That was like all I thought about as an athlete. Got to be more powerful. Then I started hearing terms like speed strength, accelerative strength, strength speed. I was like, I want all those. What are those things, right? But I would get really confused about like what's what, um, and it didn't make any sense to me, like how you would know exactly what those are if you're talking about a speed without measuring speed, right? So once I opened up, and honestly, the first people who described like 40 to 60, this like speed, 40 to 60% of one rep max, called it an unquantifiable zone because they didn't know the difference between speed strength and strength speed, right? So the Bosco strength continuum was originally described as percentages of an athlete's one rep max by Carmelo Bosco. And that's the cool image you've seen a bunch where it goes green to red, right? And it's like a continuum of different speeds. You'll see one coming up. And so the VBT speeds zones, right? They match up with the training traits of BAMPA, right? Like power is a BAMPA idea, or hypertrophy or anatomical adaptation, all that kind of stuff. And so they match up with traditional periodization. So here is so the speed trait, percentage one rep max, the average velocity, and then the trait as called by BAMPA in his book, right? And BAMPA is the original in periodization. So if we start at the bottom, absolute strength. So absolute strength down here, like above 80%, it's going to be less than 0.5 meters per second. And that's going to be max strength according to BAMPA, right? Accelerative strength. This is an interesting zone. It doesn't get enough attention. I like to squat in accelerative strength all the time, or very often. But accelerative strength is probably the first rep on a really heavy set of 5, right? And that's hypertrophy according to BAMPA at 60 to 80%. Speed strength, or strength speed, those are going to be 40 to 60% of one rep max, 0.75 to 1.0. That's Louis Simmons' dynamic effort method, right? And that's power. Then speed strength, if we did averaged out Olympic lifts, they would be about 1.0 to 1.3 meters per second, probably a little bit faster. They could be above that, but a clean would be there. That's power according to BAMPA, but speed strength according to Bosco's strength continuum. And then starting strength, not what it sounds like. Starting strength is really, that overcoming inertia, like somebody starting off of a starting block in track and field, greater than 1.3 meters per second. And when we talk about speed, if you guys are really thinking about speed, athletes at sprinters move at like 8 meters per second. A good sprinter, a great sprinter might move at 10 meters a second, right? So these are weight room fast, but these aren't sprinting speed fast. So keep that in mind as we talk about, right, speed and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to talk about weightlifting and how to apply this. So application of strength zones, right? What do we do with all that information? The most useful thing, and we will squat with that kind of dynamic effort method sometimes and apply that and track those speeds. But we're going to take we're going to velocity profile our athletes. And one of the most useful things is a book called Force and Power from Ty Terrell and Tony Giuliano, 2017. They both work up at IFAST in Indianapolis, or did work at IFAST. Really good coaches, smart guys. And they talked about taking a velocity profile, and that these athletes, that you could take a velocity profile, and by the angle of the slope, you could classify them as a gorilla, more force-oriented, or a kangaroo, and they're more velocity-oriented, right? So we're going to have like a force-oriented gorilla needs more velocity. A velocity-oriented kangaroo needs more strength. So we classify our athletes in that way by taking that velocity profile early on, and then modeling their training to move them in a new direction, right? So a gorilla might need speed, strength, and strength speed. A kangaroo might need accelerative and absolute strength and more of that kind of thing. So we may look at those different, we may look at trying to expand those different traits. And this is just a generic thing on the side here of an athlete taking like increase, moving that velocity curve, right? Moving that velocity curve so that we hit, different forces and velocities. And interestingly enough, I'm just increasing that capacity. This curve is both making the athlete faster and making the athlete, create more force. I had a really cool conversation with Dave Ballou a couple years ago, who was is an Indiana native and a good friend of one of my best friends. And he is now the strength coach at the University of Alabama, and they do all sorts of this stuff. They're tracking everything in terms of speed and even like imbalance left to right and stuff. They have a full-time sports scientist, super great, named Dr. Matt Ray. But he talked about how when he got the job at Indiana University, he loves lifting weights. And he came in and somebody's like, dude, you're going to love this guy. He's the strongest guy on the team. He squats 750 pounds. And then he's like, yeah, he works hard. Great. I love this guy. But what nobody understood was that he said, once I looked at the guy, this guy squatted 750 pounds, but he got up to that peak force in 1.6 seconds, right? He didn't reach peak force until 1.6 seconds. And he said, a football, a lineman makes contact in 0.3 to 0.5 seconds, right? He goes, so I want them to make peak force sooner. So I want to shift that velocity curve so that peak force happens, way over here early in the time as opposed to late in the time. So, this application of strength zones is, can we look at an athlete and find out if they're more force-oriented, velocity-oriented, and move them in the right direction to improve? And that applies for weightlifters. You're going to have weightlifters. And I haven't decided which is better, right? A lot of weightlifters test out as gorillas, even though we think of them as springy athletes. But I've had a couple kangaroos as well, right? They're explosive, but ultimately weightlifting is you're ultimately gonna get strong. All right, so how do we measure velocity? We got different velocity-based tools, right? Linear positional transducers, those are LPT units. Those are the ones with a wire on them. We have inertial measurement units. Those are accelerometers. They're in your phone. That's what like a push band is. There's camera-based systems. The cool thing, the reason we're doing this today is tech used to be about $1,500 per unit, at least, right? And now they're available for $400 a unit. And in particular, I don't want this to be a complete plug for Rep One. I do work with them a lot, but Rep One is an LPT unit, and every other LPT unit is $1,500 and up, and they are making and selling one for $400 per unit. So you can buy 4 or 5 units for the same price as one. So you can start to outfit rooms, get more information off more athletes and stuff like that. And the accelerometers have always been cheaper. We'll go over price list here in a second. But the fact that LPT technology has gotten this cheap is pretty impressive. All right. Consideration for velocity-based tools, right? We have these 4 quadrants. I had an athlete text me about speeds, and he said, I make snatches at this speed. And I was like, really? You're 6'5". There's no way you do that, right? Like, I've never heard of that. It's too slow. And he had a tool that was inaccurate but reliable. So he's in the bottom left corner, right? He was down here, right? He was inaccurate but reliable. It would always say the same incorrect speed, right? That was like a broken clock. It's 10 minutes off all the time. We want accurate and reliable, right? We want that. We want to hit the bullseye every time. And obviously, we don't want accurate and unreliable near the bullseye, but not really. And then inaccurate and unreliable is totally useless. But you're going to get a lot of things that are inaccurate and reliable, right? They're gonna be too slow, too fast. Might get some. And then there's a couple, there's some things out there that I feel like are accurate but unreliable. They're just going to spread about. They're going to be pretty close, but something's going to be off, right? We ultimately want accurate and reliable. Not as good, but still okay is inaccurate and reliable, right? I compare this to a scale. Or if your scale is 2 pounds light and 2 pounds heavy every time you get on it, and that's the only scale you weigh yourself on, and you're trying to lose weight, you'll eventually lose weight. It's going to tell you 2 pounds heavy when you're at your heaviest and when you're at your lightest, right? So, but it's telling you the right thing. We want accurate and reliable. You can have inaccurate and reliable, and you can make good change for yourself personally, but you'd have a hard time, necessarily applying this to everything else. All right, so an LPT unit, that measures something physical. It's got a line, goes out. That's measuring a distance. It can be quickly converted to velocity, power, secondary measurements. They're way more accurate than IMUs and accelerometers in measuring peak and average velocity. There's no drawbacks to having a tether, in my opinion, right? I did have one kid drop a weight on it, but he actually like hit a PR and then spiked the weight, and the weight turned and hit it. So it was like, that's the only bad experience. And they're the gold standard of accuracy. An IMU accelerometer, these are the easiest way to get into, they're the lowest barrier to get in, right? They're newer to the market, they're cheaper. Technology is really small. You have it on your phone. If you have an Apple Watch, you got one in there. They don't do anything with it, but there's push bands, all that stuff. They do need the knowledge of the movement performed. So they use algorithms. And if you think about doing math to get there, we're going to lose something in that translation, right? And they've been shown to be less accurate on things that are fast. They can probably handle a squat, but they can't handle a snatch. They do have really cool secondary features like bar path on some of them. And so that's getting really neat. And then camera base is kind of the newest to market. They use 3D camera technology. You can kind of think about like a Microsoft Kinect. They're not ideal for measuring bar speed because they use computations to get there. They're looking at like those pixels in that picture and then at like trying to do math to get there. But they do have really cool secondary features. You can see imbalances if one side's moving faster than the other. You can do any movement in there and track the speed on that. And they're the most expensive due to the need for all the computing power to kind of look at that image and turn it into something. They're what you see a lot in like big weight rooms right now. Okay, and the final piece of the puzzle is the user interface. This is like just a screenshot of the user interface on one of the on something called a VMAX Pro, and it shows you some pretty cool stuff, right? Some neat information on that. So velocity is only one piece. So do you want to look at other stuff? Do you want to look at all of them measuring like bar height at which the peak velocity occurs? Do you want to look at imbalances, all that kind of stuff? And then how much programming do you want to hand off? So a lot of these are basically asking you like, hey, would you, do you want us to like put a green light up when the athlete can go up, but a red light when the athlete has to go down or something like that? So you can hand off programming to some of these Rep One, the Elite Forms, Perch, all of those all have software behind them that you could actually basically hand off your programming, and it's just on a kiosk telling the athlete, go up, go down, stay there, good set, move on, whatever. All right, so VBT device is just a little handy chart for you guys to take a look at. You got the LPTs at the top. You'll see that GymAware is pretty expensive. Tendo's cheaper. Tendo used to be the gold standard. They haven't done anything on the user interface side that I'm aware of that makes it useful, right? As compared to what GymAware and Rep One are doing. Pushband, Bar Sensei, Beast, VMAX Pro, those are all IMUs. And then when it comes to cameras, there's Perch, which they have a unit that's $19.99. That's pretty neat. An Elite Form, I don't believe they're for individual use. And then GymAware Flex actually uses lasers and like a reflective mat. And I've only heard that it's semi-inaccurate when it comes to Olympic lifts. They have some hard times with it just because it's not measuring something physical. It's doing computations based on lasers. All right. So Brian Mann made this really cool quote, and people worry about it all the time. They say like, well, if I put a velocity speed, they're just beating the target. They're just chasing the machine. And some people don't like that idea. Velocity is just another coach on the floor. It's not the coach on the floor. If the velocity says go up, but you witness something that didn't look like the athlete should go up, they don't go up, right? Because you're the coach. If the velocity says go down, but you got this feeling that you want to send them up, you use that idea about velocity. Does that make sense? And then you say, all right, go, right? If that athlete needs it mentally and you believe that they're tough enough to go get that next rep or something like that. So it's another coach on the floor. It's giving you a piece of feedback. They're your assistant coach. And you can, kindly overrule your assistant coach if you want. Also, technique over velocity, right? We said if it's a bad lift, do not evaluate velocity without proper technique. So it's not like we don't want beginners using it. This is a pretty experienced athlete. I actually made her do this incorrectly. But what you see sometimes when you put an athlete on the unit is like, oh, I'm going to really go fast, coach. I got this. And then they'll do what's on the right, and they'll pull back really hard, right? They'll get this like big arch right there, and they'll pull back on it, thinking that's going to go faster. And that doesn't make the bar go faster. Hyperextension of the low back of the lumbar spine does not make the bar faster. Turns out that really good big drive with the legs straight down is what makes it go fast. So we establish good technique, and we go technique over velocity, right? If we see bad technique, we don't let them go up. But if we see good technique with good velocity, then the athlete could go up. And then we think about just as a hierarchy of weightlifting, right? Position, then speed, then load, right? Establish good positions, establish good technique, all that kind of stuff. Can the athlete hit those things? Can the athlete transition from position to position with good movement? Then once they can do that, we add speed. And this is independent of velocity-based training at all, right? We do this position, then speed, then load, right? So once those positions are established, you can add speed, and then you start thinking about intensifying the loading. All right. So one thing to think about, as we go into this, most Olympic lifts take 1 second to occur, regardless of the lift. Snatch, 1 second. Clean, 1 second. It might be 0.95, point B, 1.02, right? But it's about 1 second. The lift that moves farther during that time must move faster. So a snatch moves farther than a clean. They're both about 1 second. A snatch moves farther, so it has to move faster to get there. You can do an analogy with a car, right? But Roman categorized minimums based on the athlete's height, so taller athletes have to move the bar faster. So speeds from Roman, 150 centimeters, so that's under 5 feet tall. Snatch 165, clean 1.2. My jerk is covered up for me, but you guys can see the jerk category. 160, so 62 inches, that's 5 feet 2. 1.7. So we can see as we go down, right? As we go down, it has to get faster because the athlete gets taller. It has to get faster. Snatches faster than cleans. Jerks, they're actually pretty fast. Jerks are, if you look at that grouping on jerk, it's a little tighter. I don't talk as much about the jerk in here, but I think there's some idiosyncrasies to the jerk in terms of height and speed and stuff that are a little bit different. But those are the speeds from Roman, and they hold pretty true. They are the minimums. They're the average of the minimums of the athletes he tested in his book, right? So could you have 180 centimeter, a 5'10" lifter snatch and make a snatch at 1.79 meters per second? Probably, right? That's pretty close to what Roman says. Will you have some that make it at 2.2 or 2.02, 2.05? Yeah, probably, right? But these are about the thing. So if you saw something way off, you would then get a little fishy on this. So those are all the speeds from Roman. Those are really useful to kind of keep in your mind, right? All right. This is one that I've created based on the height of like the pole in relation to the athlete. This is probably like a 6 foot tall athlete. I got a bunch of people who are like 5'9" to 6 feet tall, right? 6'1". And so pulling the bar to the navel, 1.3 to 1.5 meters per second. So you can think that's probably a clean. It's pretty heavy clean. To the sternum is 1.7 meters per second. It's power clean. Shoulder, 2.0, that's a snatch. Chin, 2.2, power snatch. Forehead, 2.5 meters plus. That's muscle snatch territory, right? So what you can see then that this is what you could use if you didn't have a unit. You kind of like say, all right, I want to. It's higher is faster, right? So it's kind of easy to do, but that is roughly what we're seeing, and you can adjust those down. Rudimentary, you could just like adjust them down a little bit if the athlete's shorter. All right, training considerations then. Work equals force times distance, right? Taller athletes moving the same load do more work per set, right? So longer distance, same force is greater work, right? So a big, tall person, so you might need to think about the amount of work they do in a session, right? The power equals force times velocity. Same weight, higher velocity, right? Because the athlete is taller, right? They have to achieve a taller velocity to snatch it. Taller athletes must create more power to move the same load per rep. So a taller athlete is typically going to do more work in a session than a shorter athlete, even if they're training at the same speeds, right? Or loads, you know? So it may be the same percentage of their 1 rep max, but because they have to move it farther, it's going to be more work. Just a thought. Here's another one. Are hang movements equal to full? So movements where the athletes can act longer upon a barbell will be faster. So hang, clean, and snatch are slower than snatch and clean from the floor. Deficit snatch is faster than snatch from the floor. Think about this like a flying 30 versus a 30 with a static start, right? 30-meter sprint or 30-yard dash, whatever. If the athlete gets 10 yards to run in on it, they're going to hit a higher speed than the athlete who's static at the start. So an athlete who has to just start above the knee, the static 30, they're gonna run slower than the athlete who's got the flying start. Now this can be counteracted a little bit if the athlete uses a real quick, counter movement into the clean hang, right? If they're static, they slow down to the position, stick it, hold tight, and then go. That is going to be slower, right? Like a block clean. Block clean or a static hang clean are going to be slower than a regular one. Are pulls an equal substitute for classic lifts? So you can say, I'm going to do 3 snatches with 115. If I can get this to speed up a little, so you guys don't have to watch. So 115 by 3, I'll show you guys the speeds. All right, so keep in mind, I did this looking at power, right? But power is speed, right? Force and velocity. Velocity is a speed thing. Force is it has acceleration, mass times acceleration. So force and velocity are both speed dependent largely. 4,300 watts on the snatch, right? If I go to 3 pulls at 115, 3,600 watts, 3,800 watts, 3,400 watts, right? I was moving as fast as possible, but they're not as fast. They can't be as fast. And the reason is you terminate the lift. If you pull it to your belly button, that's not going as fast as you don't reach your ultimate speed. You're terminating the lift, so pulls are always slower. This one's, can pulls replicate the speed of competition lifts? So this is follow up to that one. So this one is, so my cleans were 1.7, 1.74. There's my son Jack running by. I did a clean pull at 1.51 meters per second. A clean high pull was 1.62. And then the only pull that releases is a hand release pull. So you just pull it up and like you can let go. So that is the way to equate the speed. So this is like, do you want pulls to be a speed exercise? Are they for speed or are they for position, right? I don't know. But pulls, that just shows the distance principle, that distance is important. Muscle snatches outperform pulls for power output. Muscle snatches are the king, right? If you're wanting speed, muscle snatches is the fastest thing you can do in the weight room, right? My muscle snatches are 3 meters a second or over. I've hit 3.4 meters per second. The same day I've hit a PR, right? And that's a high pull velocity 2.6. Distance equals speed. Okay, so you get a velocity-based training unit. You get an LPT. You get a push band. You get a gym board. Whatever you get. You get a rep point. What's the first thing you're gonna do? Attach it to everything and track all these things. Get a bunch of data points. Don't. Just stop. Don't tell people to go faster. Don't say, I read this, you got to go this. You create a velocity profile. So velocity profile is athlete-specific profile of the velocities an athlete moves different percentages as they progress towards 1 rep max. I take a velocity profile of a snatch, clean, jerk, front squat. You can do back squat if you want. Those are my 5 big ones that I do, okay? Front squat and back squat would be pretty close. But I take those 5 things. A velocity profile, why is it important, right? Those are the 5 things I'm going to program around. You can take it around a push press, you can do a bench press, you can do a deadlift, whatever you want. But whatever important, you need a velocity profile. So an athlete's velocity will stay the same at the same percent, even if the 1 rep max changes. So if an athlete has 100 kilo max and they do 80 at 0.6 meters per second, right? 80%, 80 kilos at 0.6 meters per second. If their max goes to 150 in the back squat, they will do 120, their new 80%, still at 0.6 meters per second. So a velocity profile is basically an athlete's calling card. So you can use a velocity profile for programming down the road. You can use a velocity profile on a daily basis to estimate changes in 1 rep max. Because if they were doing 80 at 0.6 meters per second, then one day they come in and they do 90 at 0.6 meters per second, you go, wait, their 1 rep max went up. You can start adjusting what you believe they do, right? So velocity profile is super important, and it's going to be unique for athletes. So here's how I get it. Another thing you're going to get out of that, you're going to get the minimum velocity profile or minimum velocity threshold. I'll call it MVT a lot. Minimum velocity profile, we can find the threshold. This is the slowest an athlete can go during a lift and still make the lift. MVT is different for different lifts. Weightlifting movement, MVTs vary by movement. Squats usually about 0.3 meters per second. You'll likely be able to make one under. If grinders can do it. I think that like power lifters can definitely do it. I've seen power lifters make stupid slow squats. Most of my weightlifters can make squats in the 0.25 to 0.28, but I kind of don't want them to get down there, right? And bench press is usually about 0.15. So this is a number around which we can build the program. I build everything off the MVT. So there's also a reps left velocity profile. So any set to failure, and this is a different thing. The minimum velocity threshold is the slowest speed you can make at a 1 rep max and the 5 rep max. So the final rep on a rep max set is the minimum velocity threshold, right? You can see this in a very similar way, right? During any set to failure, velocity was similar when looking at reps remaining in the set. So this was consistent no matter the weight or the percentage on the bar. So this was like 60%, 65, 70, 75, I believe. And the athlete did as many as they could. So like at 60%, they were doing 20, they did 22 reps. And then at 75, I think they did 10. So when they had 9 reps left, it was always around 0.5 something. 8 reps left at about 0.52, right? When it had 0 reps left, the final rep, 0.34, 0.32, 0.33, 0.31. So the final rep in a set is really valuable. Intra-set, you can kind of start looking and saying like, hey, you just did that at 0.5. Keep going. You got 7 more in you, right? By looking at something like this. All right, so how to create a velocity profile. When an athlete attempts a 1 rep max record, record the speeds at each interval along the way. You could use, it's kind of prescribed as every 5% from 30% to 90%, kind of impractical. That's a lot of lifts. I do 10% increases from 50 to 70% and then 5% until 90% plus on something like a squat, right? This is squat, front squat or whatever. With enough data points, the slope of the decline can be extrapolated 100%. So if 0.3-ish is about 0 reps left, this is me doing it. I started 60, 80, 120, 34. I just went round numbers. I did 200 at 0.45 meters per second. And then just by putting in Excel, getting the line of best fit, I could see that I could hit 0.322 at about 220. And about 3 weeks later, I squatted 220 at 0.313. So pretty accurate to do this. For weight, okay, so from the velocity profile, you can create velocity ranges for percents, right? So 90-ish percent is going to be 0.4 to 0.5, 80%, whatever. So these are more accurate than traditional percent. So you may want to get the 90% information, like I want the stimulus that I think 90% provides. So we would program 0.4 to 0.5. I want the stimulus that 80% provides. I'm going to program 0.6 to 0.7. All right, so weightlifting profiles must be done individually because there's so much variation in the height of athletes. Do not begin tracking velocities below 75 to 80% of the 1 rep max because the athlete's going to mess with their pull to make it happen, right? They're either going to pull under and slow it down because they want it to make it look like a real snatch or real clean, or they're going to muscle clean it or muscle snatch it. So I don't start until about 75 to 80%, and then I get a bunch of points from there on up. We're going to go like, here's clean velocity comparison, right? This is me, 75%, 2.13, 2.09, anyways, 100% was 1.67. Speed is shorter lifter, 1.84, 1.75, 1.77. This is interesting. You might see that go up right there. 1.75, no belt. They went up 5%, added a belt. The speed went back up, right? So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see that happen. And you will see that belts are pretty effective, will make athletes move faster. 165 and 163 at their 100%. And they're slightly shorter than me. I'm 5'10", they're 5'7", 5'8", something like that. So you just see a little bit difference in that. I move lighter numbers much faster too. I don't know why. All right, so we can use VBT. So we create the velocity profile, then we can easily use it in training really quickly. If I have my athletes get this, I have them create a velocity profile in the first couple of weeks. They get a unit, or we have a unit and I want to start using it with them. We'll create a velocity profile, and then we'll immediately start using it to evaluate readiness. So vertical jumps, accepted method to test readiness. Decrease in vertical jump indicated less work would be completed in the session. Jump squat performance also can predict 1 rep max in the back squat. So athletes who have a higher jump squat prior to, or even a faster jump squat, I think they did it for velocity. They did on velocity, sorry. A faster jump squat or before the session would have a higher 1 rep max in the back squat. So I use a muscle snatch and test the velocity on that to test daily readiness. Super simple, really high velocity. There's no termination point in a muscle snatch. We're going to choose about 40 to 50%, and we just stick with a weight. I don't care if it's 42%. I do 70 kilos, which is a little over 50%. It was 50% when I started doing it, and now that I'm, lost 5 kilos on my snatch over 5 years or 4 years, I haven't snatched 140 in a couple of years. I snatched 135 or 138 last year. So it's a little over 50%. So it's no termination point, and it mimics the weightlifting movement. So I'm going to know if the athlete's ready. I love using this as a tool to test readiness. I also like it as a tool to test readiness over a whoop band, HRV, all that kind of stuff, because the athlete has made it to the gym and we get to talk. And if I need to make a change in the program, I can make the change now, right? Once they're already there. So this is some of my information. You can see I don't have a really bad result in this. I've actually found that I mostly have okay results, which is the 3.0s, the 3.2s, right? And then I have really good results. I had a 3.47, hit a snatch PR, right? Or a snatch PR over the last year. So 100% plus snatch, 1 rep max. But if I have a 3.0, I'm still hitting 90% plus. I'm hitting whatever I need to in that complex. It might not be an all-time PR, but if it'll hit 90% of my best of that complex or more. 3.29, you see it, number 6, that was a big one. So muscle snatch for readiness. This is a really good point to talk about another one. I've never talked about this. I think this is pretty new stuff and kind of have been wrapping my brain around it. But this is the effort index. So a similar idea. So this is Rodriguez and Russell in 2018. They were able to link post-session fatigue directly to measures of velocity within the session. The researchers used effort index. I'm just reading this to you guys because I'm not this smart. To accurately predict blood lactate levels and acute neuromuscular fatigue. The cool thing was acute neuromuscular fatigue was at a test weight that they did prior to training and after training. And when using the effort index, it correlated perfectly to how many they would get at the end. So you would know how they performed. So they took the best mean velocity an athlete achieved in a set and the percent velocity loss attained in the same set to create the effort index. So for instance, if you have top mean velocity in a set of 0.6 meters per second, but your velocity loss in the set was 30%, you'd have an effort index of 18. If it was 0.6 and then you had a 40% drop, your effort index would be 24. So on the surface, we can know that the second workout was harder, but effort index was able to quantify how much harder. They measured blood lactate post-workout and the testing set. So this effort index is using velocity not only for readiness. This is leading to a thing where we could look at the training session and know the amount of fatigue, know the exact amount of stress that's putting on the athlete by looking at that peak mean velocity and then also the velocity loss in a set. Okay, so how to train with velocity. So this is different ways to use it in a program. I think we're doing okay on time, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. We're an hour in. I got a handful more slides. These are the fun ones. Simplest way, we can just train versus MVT. So we use the base minimum velocity threshold to make our training decisions. So add 0.05 meters per second to keep the reps kind of smooth and clean. We have the athlete just stay above the minimum velocity threshold for the entire set. Really, we're only looking at the last rep, right? That's the only one that should get close to it. And we can cease work if it falls below, or we can capitalize on good days. I think a lot of people are worried that if you train with velocity, they're going to be like, well, I felt good, I need to go get it, but the velocity says I'm not there. The times that happens is way less often than the days where I go, holy crap, I got it, let's go. Or I look at my athlete and say, you know, I'm a dork for saying this, but I said send it, right? And I shouldn't have said send it, but I said send it to him. And so I think that like that on those days that they're good, I see more times where I'm like, let's get after it because you're moving so fast. And so anyways, as a look, a snatch, clean, and jerk, the speed recognition is greater than the peak velocity for height or tested MVT. And we just adjust speeds up slightly so that no reps fall below MVT. On front and back squat, 0.3 is that lowest one. So we want to stay above 0.3 meters per second average velocity, but actually keep, except for in a test week, I try and tell the athletes to keep all reps above 0.4 meters per second. If we start getting into 0.3 meters per second, we're nearing a failure. And we're going to have some bad positions in the squat. And I just don't like to push the squats like that, except for testing. Okay, we can replace, this is the cool one, right? This is where I think we're doing some cool stuff. We replace percent with velocity, right? And on the right, we'll see like a traditional program is like week 1 is kind of your base week. You might do 5 by 3 around 75% or something, right? Yeah, 75 to 80%. Week 2, you're kind of loading it 5 by 3 or 4 by 3 in week 1, 5 by 3 at 77 to 82 in week 2, recovery week. And then week 4 might be a PR week. We're going for a 3 rep max plus some back offs, or maybe 85 to 90% if it's a 3 rep max. But we're going to replace percentage with the velocity. And because percentage is just a guess, right? We already talked about that. That is like, if you take a percentage, you want a specific response and you're just guessing it's an educated guess. We have a bunch of books. We've got a bunch of experience. It's an educated guess because we don't know everything that happened to the athlete that day. And so with MVT as our 100%, we can back up to create our weekly loading, right? Okay, so here's a sample velocity program. What we're going to do, this is the column. So this is still base week over here. Sets and reps could be similar, right? You'll see different, used to call it a recovery week, and I call it a speed buster week when we're training with velocity. But instead of at 75%, this is going to be in week 1, we're going to be 7.5 to 10% over the MVT, right? So snatch example, we're going to be snatch at 2.15 to 2.2 meters per second. If the example MVT is 2.0 meters per second, we're going to go 7.5 to 10% over the MVT. This is the screen you want to screenshot, okay? Clean MVT 1.6 meters per second, we'd be at 1.72 or 1.76. Jerk 1.82 to 1.87, right? So it's 7.5 to 10% over. Loading week, more reps, or more total volume because we're doing more sets and reps. We're at 5% to 7.5% over MVT. Snatch 2.1, 2.15, clean, right? So these have descended a little. So you can imagine it's getting a little bit heavier. This is speed buster week. This is our recovery week. We're going to do 6 to 9 singles at greater than 10% over MVT. This is the fastest speed. So we're going to be over 2.2. We're going to be over 1.76. We're going to be over 1.87, right? So we're going to be the fastest we are. That's like our speed buster week. This is evolving as weightlifting coaches. This is evolving into like what our peak is looking like. We're going to start peaking using these 6 to 9 singles, right? At greater than 10% over, because these will be pretty heavy, right? Because you can move a single pretty fast, right? And then PR week 3, we're going for a 3 rep max, or week 4, we're going for 3 rep max. I'm going to keep them 2.5 to 5% over the MVT unless an attempt at a PR is warranted, right? So like they're looking really good, they're smoking lifts, they're at 95% of their previous best, and they're hitting it at 8-10% over. We'll we'll go down and we'll go to the MVT or lower if they establish a new one. So that's the velocity program. That's what we're doing. We're doing, let me see if I put this in. Okay. This is velocity program with lifts, right? We're doing a pretty linear style, right? I don't know if that slides in here. I'll check. But if this is, triples in block 1, we might do doubles in block 2. We might do singles in block 3, right? Just a linear program with the same things going here, right? Just as we lead into the meet. Squatting, we're going to have a large deviation from MVT due to non-ballistic nature. We don't want grindy reps. We keep the threshold at 0.4 for the most part. Week 1, greater than 0.5. Week 2, greater than 0.45. Week 3, greater than 0.5. Week 4, 0.4. That's just really general. Most times I said you'll test the MVT, you'll get the MVT on a squat, and it'll be 0.3 or really close. If it's lower than that, you can go lower. You can go lower than that. I have a 49 kilo girl or woman who is 4'11". She squats at 0.2 regular. She'll make a lift and say, oh, it's pretty easy, and it'll be like 0.2 meters per second. So hers drop a little lower, but for the most part, this is pretty accurate. Okay, guys, this actually works. This is Maddie Rogi. There's going to be a bunch of videos. Let me see if I can mute these real quick. I hope they're muted. But Maddie did a 149 at University Nationals right before shutdown. This is like February. So that's like, I think she did 64 and 75. Is that right? No. Yeah, 64. And anyways, she did 149 at universities, and then came back home. We had shut down. I gave her rep 1. We started training this program exclusively, only velocity. 12 weeks later. Oh, here comes the music. She makes 72. Let's go! All right. She makes 72 and 91, right? And she's a 59 kilo lifter. And so that's a big improvement. That's 14 kilos from a girl who's already making national meets and has made nationals for a couple of years. And she's going to she's likely going to hit something even bigger this weekend. She's got to meet locally. So we're another 8 weeks down the road. I think she total 170 or something this week. So that's, 20 something kilos. And I think it's the auto regulation, right? Like she feels good when she attempts her lifts, right? Like we are attempting stuff and we're moving through that really, really well. So we had 12 weeks on that with the 3-2-1 kind of reduction and reps per set. And then we're coming back 8 weeks and we did like 2s and 1s. Let's get to the next one. Okay. So, and then we can also have this variation. So that's the money thing, but we can also do a ton of things. And this is a cool slide. This was originally on Perch. They had something really similar. This is the idea where I did it, but variations on traditional programs, right? So you can, X's are established, question mark is a variable, right? So you could say 5 sets of 3 at, whatever. We could say, we could say 5 sets of 3 at 100 kilos, right? Or 5 sets of 3 at 0.5 meters per second, but we don't know what we're going to do, right? So the load's a question mark. You add velocity in, you could say 5 sets, don't know the reps, stay above 0.5 meters per second at 100 kilos, right? Do as many reps until you fall under the velocity threshold. You can go a percent drop. So if you drop 20%, you're done. Sets, load, velocity, set, do as many reps as possible until the athlete loses a determined percent. Down here, this is variable sets, variable reps. Load and velocity loss are chosen, right? Reps per set and total sets dependent upon velocity decrease. So 100 kilos for as many reps as possible until a 20% decrease in speed each set, for as many sets as possible until the first rep is 20% slower than the fastest, right? So like now we're looking like multiple variables based on the speed loss. So you can do so many cool different things, just regular stuff, right? So you talk about the velocity loss in a time where we're looking for more athlete hypertrophy or something like that. That would be a really good time to do it. I would say that with weightlifting, I use this the most, minimum velocity and load, right? And then I might do this sometimes, right? Sets, velocity, and load are chosen. Do as many reps until under velocity threshold. So a really variable set. So that was pretty cool. All right, so we're going to wrap up here in a second. Anyways, training with velocity does not unlock secret training that looks unlike normal smart training. It looks just like smart training with a better variable, right? That is a thought. So I had this big internet kind of argument with Dane Miller, and we're really good friends. So I was like, we talked about it before we then decided like send contrasting YouTube videos towards one another. But he kind of expressed it like, he's like, well, you don't need that. This is this, and, it's this and that and whatever. It's I got to change this, and you'd have to change this, and that doesn't make any sense. And it's not something to be scared of. It looks exactly like normal smart training. If you have a good training program in place, if you add velocity to it, it will be a better training program. It'll just be better. You'll have a cooler variable, a variable that's more true, and you will get better information out of it. If you have a bad training program and you add velocity to it, I don't think it's going to do anything. I think it's going to not be comfortable. If you don't have a system of programming, don't worry about velocity, right? Get better at your system of programming. If you have a system of programming you feel pretty confident about that makes good results already, velocity is going to accelerate those results because it's a better variable. Oh, all right. So I just want to thank you guys. Get in touch at Wil Fleming. We're going to go ahead. Let's do this. We're going to stop share. Let's see if I can get, all right. All right. So did anybody have any questions? I'm looking at chat. I don't know if I've seen anything come up. I am recording it. If you guys were on and then got off, I will be recording it, and yeah, I'll try to send it out to you. If you guys hit me up, I will send it out to you. Any questions from anybody? Trevor, it's going to be shorter. So tall snatch is going to be a short movement, so it's going to be pretty slow on most days. So I would not use it. I'd use a muscle snatch. It's too simple to not use, right? Muscle snatch is long. There's no termination point. You have to move the bar as fast as possible. And if you move it as fast as possible, you're going to get a true readiness that day. Just like vertical jump, right? You wouldn't do like a variation of vertical jump. You do vertical jump or you do jump squat. So I think the muscle snatch is a really good one for weightlifting. I'm actually having my athletes do it on snatch days and clean days. Jim, thanks a bunch. Really glad you could attend. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. VCT, ETA on the book. My publisher told me he would have it wrapped up completely on, or not my publisher, my editor, like wrapped up completely by September 1st was his hope. So depending on how fast I can turn that into printing, it'll happen this fall. Thanks, Trevor. Christopher Martin, that was awesome. Perfect. If you guys, seriously, you guys who have attended, I will keep a list of who attended, and I will send it out to you guys. I am going to put it on my website. If you lose it, I'm going to put it on my website. It'll be probably like $9 to download it, or $10 or something like that, just so I can pay for my Zoom membership. Okay, let's see. All right, so Art, thanks a bunch. Eric, does muscle snatch need to have contact for readiness evaluation? My coach tends to run us through no contact muscles to ensure we keep the best part. I've always done a muscle snatch with contact. I think the thing would be contact is more hip driven. No contact is very arm driven, or can be very upper body driven. So I think we might be measuring different things. My guess would be if you just do a movement every day and test that, you will get a really good thing, as long as that movement is like technically done similarly most days. So I think you do no contact. I do contact. You might compare them and test them both and see if you have something different. Stu, if do you see variability in someone's velocities for the lifts? Somewhat. I mean, there will be variability, but I tend to chalk it up to readiness. So if the athlete is like, if the athlete's ready, we're going to see the velocities that we should intend to see. But you know, I would take that 80% velocity and believe that it's 80% over think that we're getting something wrong out of the unit, unless the athlete's technique is way off all the time, right? If it's way off all the time, then I'm not going to do it. You know, I don't believe if it's way off all the time, they're probably not ready for it, right? So that would be where I'd see variability. Eric, we answered that. Kaylee, thanks a bunch. Thanks, Kaylee, for coming. Brian, what happens if you retest? Okay, so you might see like 100, their minimum velocity threshold decrease. I don't know why I didn't put this slide in. That is a mistake on my part. But we can evaluate some efficiency with velocity as well. Obviously, a better athlete is better at getting under the bar. We all know that, right? That really separates people. So as an athlete gets more used to training, they might get faster under the bar, right? I actually texted Spencer Arnold texted me tonight, and he was asking about how fast something went. And so I saw, Harrison can do cleans at 1.3 something when the literature that I've read said he should do them at 1.5. Well, Harrison's like a super efficient lifter, right? I have kids who don't make snatches under 2.25 when they probably should be able to make them at 2.0, right? So you'd see some efficiencies and stuff like that. So yes, if an athlete gets more efficient, you might see them, you might see those lifts, those MBTs slow down. Adam, thanks a bunch. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Matt, yeah, Rogi says you're great. Hope your lifting's going well. Hope you'll come join us sometime. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Brian, you know, you coach a bunch of really good people, so you would see that kind of stuff. Athletes' body velocity improves into the squat. We've always talked about, could I attach an LPT unit to the ceiling, and because it only measures the bar going out, could I see how fast an athlete goes down? The old V scope at the OTC used to do that. Bach, for various lifters, the velocity profile of a single rep might be different throughout a pull in order to reach the same height. Would it be worth measuring both average and peak velocity power for pulls? Okay. So for various lifters, the velocity profile of a single rep might be different throughout a pull in order to reach the same height. Would it be worth measuring? Okay. Where I think you might see some interesting thing, I think peak velocity is what you want, right? Because these units will find the peak velocity wherever, and almost all of them will also tell you the percent or the range of motion and the percent at which the peak velocity occurred. So we're going to say, for instance, just to give round numbers, the range of motion on a lift was 1,000 millimeters, and at 80%, the peak velocity occurred. So at 80% of the peak height, so 800 millimeters was where the peak velocity actually occurred. So you can look at that number, right? So you know where a peak happens, and then you can look at average, and there could be some correlation, and I haven't really gone into it enough to figure it out, but there could be some correlation between the efficiency of an athlete and when they have like a higher overall average velocity, right? Or if that average velocity starts getting closer and closer to the peak. But I really, really think for Olympic lifts, you really need to dial in on the peak stuff. And then I've just been using average and some of those secondary numbers like range of motion, all that kind of stuff to start seeing if I can see more efficiency kinds of things. All right, let's see. Sam, thanks a bunch. Oh, Brian, there we go. I hope that helped out. Sam, thank you, man. I think with some PAP work would be cool. We were talking about like peak force, getting what are those, like force scales, and kind of pulling on those. Thanks, Chris. Brian, all right. Measure velocities by hand because I hate myself. Have you noticed that the peak velocity occurs during the initial pull under in the snatch clean? It happens at right after the hips extend. Um, I I have an image of it with when I was like hooking it up to something else. It doesn't happen. It happens when the bar is like moving on its own. You have propelled it as much as it possibly can. So it's not like right at the hips. It's just above the hips as the bar is beginning to float because your impulse is finally in the bar. That's when you're gonna find the peak velocity. Um, and some good athletes have already started transition under, and guys like me just keep pulling it up, right? All right. Anybody else? I'm here. I allotted an hour and a half. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If not, we can log off. All right. Brian, you know, all of you guys, hit me up. Instagram is a great place to reach me. If you guys want to reach me there and message me, my email is wtfleming@gmail. You guys saw it earlier on the last slide. But Instagram is a really easy way to reach me. I will try to, if you guys send me your email, I'll try to get this recording out to you in the next week or so. I'll probably trim it down a little bit. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys very much. And when the book comes out in September, pick it up. Should be cool. Or when it comes out in October. Thanks, Stu. You're the only person whose face I could see for some reason. And so I was gauging your face based on if I was doing a good job or not. So I appreciate it. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great night. Hit me up, let me know, and look out for the book coming next month or the month after.